Barry was arrested and charged in her death back in 2020, but the charges were later dropped. Police in Arizona took him into custody today. Denver 7 is working to learn more information about this high-profile case, including what exactly led to this development. We'll be sure to update you when we know more.
Of all the cases I've covered in America, I'm not sure if I've spent more time in the fabric than this one. I went to their home on Puma Path, drove around the mines and streams in the area. I even stayed in the same Holiday Inn Barry stayed in Broomfield. I drove the same route from Puma Path to Broomfield that he did on that fateful Sunday. I visited the field where Suzanne's remains were found right outside Moffat, as well as a nearby golf course. I visited the wall that he was apparently working on in Broomfield. It was basically his alibi. I even drove to Alexandria in Indiana to get a feel for the fabric, that sort of hometown fabric where Barry and Suzanne met, fell in love. They actually met on a golf course and ultimately left to pursue a better life in Colorado. So I felt the frustration, just as many of you did, but perhaps even more burdened by it, of no justice, just this persistence of nothing happening, no justice in Suzanne Morphew's murder.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
But you know what? In all of these cases, Chris Watts, Patrick Frazee, Jennifer Dulos, Lori Vallow, people disappeared, and for a long time, nothing happened. During that interval, while we were looking on, hoping someone would get caught, isn't it possible someone else was looking on and getting ideas? For example, starting to think, starting to believe how easy it was to get away with murder. In this analysis, we're going to deal with some of these intertextual cases. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button and let's get started. Now, in all the cases I mentioned, Chris Watts, Patrick Frazee, Jennifer Dulos, Lori Vallow, all of these cases, there were a few days in the Chris Watts case. There were weeks or even years when I think the perpetrators believed precisely that someone had gotten away with murder. And think about us. Think about us looking on in the Suzanne Morphew case. It was starting to feel like someone had gotten away with murder, right? It took 4 years to get a conviction for the murder of Jennifer Dulos, and even longer to get some convictions in the Lori Vallow case. What all of these cases have in common is the myth that no body equals no crime. What all of these cases have in common is this effort going to a lot of effort to hide the bodies. Now, one of the few people who may have gotten away with this is, in terms of no body equals no crime, is the killer of Kathleen Durst, Robert Durst's wife. So while it looked as if the killers of Jennifer Dulos would get off, even though her body wasn't found, what they did find was plenty of evidence that together produced basically a mosaic, and it was actually clear that she had actually suffered a violent death. What's nevertheless true is, without Suzanne Morphew's remains, and in particular those samples of BAM, this case would certainly have been tough to prosecute, but not, in my opinion, impossible, as the Dulos case proves. In the end, in the Suzanne Morphew case, you can have a 131-page affidavit. The bottom line is about proof, what you can prove.
It doesn't matter what I believe. It only matters what I can prove.
And so, in the end, these vast passages of time are about finding proof to back up beliefs. Beliefs alone are not enough. The prosecution have huge hurdles, heavy burdens to meet, and sometimes they appear not to meet them, as we saw in the Karen Reid trial. But there are also other cases like O.J. Simpson, Casey Anthony, and West Memphis 3. I do want to return to what we mentioned in the timelines and just put the names and the dates of these cases on screen so that you can sort of juxtapose them. Chris Watts, August 13, 2018. The murder of Kelsey Bereth, Thanksgiving, that's November 2018, barely 3 months later. The murder of Jennifer Dulos, May 24th, 2019, just 6 months later. 3 months after that, the murders of Tylee Ryan and J.J. Vello in September 2019. 9 months after that, Suzanne Morphew was murdered on Mother's Day in May 2020. Now, if someone was thinking, I don't like this woman and she's having an affair, and I believe just as in the Lori Vallow case, the primary motive here is greed. And so if Suzanne had divorced Barry, then it would have been impossible for him to inherit or get hold of some of the money. Suzanne had actually just inherited something like $500,000, and Barry was actively lending money from her. And so if Suzanne didn't die or disappear in the way that she did, it's very similar to the Lacey Peterson case, then her spouse would struggle to get custody of her assets. And I must say, Barry was more successful in being able to do that compared to Scott Peterson. But if this was a premeditated murder and someone was looking at her and realizing she's having an affair and everything is coming to an end, I'm going to need to act quickly. Meanwhile, all of these other cases are playing out in the periphery, on the radio, on television, in the mainstream media, in social media. And isn't this in a way possibly triggering the criminal psychology that is brewing in the background? So as I've said before, I'm convinced many of these murders, and let's face it, many of them happened in Colorado, influenced the murders that followed. Now, in terms of my impressions, one thing that I can share with you is the drive from Puma Path to Broomfield there's very little cell phone signal. So even if you're trying to use Google Maps to navigate, there's a lot of interruptions to cellular service. So good luck trying to track a phone, under those circumstances. One does get a sense that Barry was going a long way. He ended up going a long way for nothing because he didn't do any construction work. But it does make one think that he went all of that way in order to establish an alibi. Suzanne has disappeared, somebody else finds out, and then, oh no, I was somewhere else, I'm the last to know. Of course, it's early days in this case. Barry is yet to be put on trial. A court date is yet to be finalized. Meanwhile, over the past 5 years, I've published almost 120 videos on the Morphew case. I'm not sure if there's many other true crime channels that have done the same, as well as a 10-episode deep dive dealing with the original 131-page affidavit in detail. We know what happened following that. Barry got let off on a technicality and has been free to roam since then, even attempting to sue the authorities for having the temerity to investigate him. But one feels time has finally caught up with the hunter from Indiana. One can only wonder what Suzanne's daughters have made of all this, or have they been in a kind of denial all this time? What will this news do to their beliefs? Will it challenge them, or are they going to continue to support Barry, their father, regardless? Well, time will tell. One last thing, the district attorney, Ann Kelly, was asked a question, how did you know where Barry was in Arizona? Were you sort of monitoring him? And she kind of dodged the question. She did say that would form part of the trial. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to find out what surveillance came up and why they chose to arrest Barry when they did. Like, what other information is out there that is not in this affidavit? I'm sure there is some. In fact, I'm sure there's quite a lot. All right, I'm not going to take it further than that. I hope you've had a great weekend. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.